Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm very happy to be joined by Deborah Evans, LLG's Chief Executive. Hello, Deborah.
Well, hello, Helen, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here on what's looking like a really hot summer's day.
Very hot summer's day, and it's been a while since you've got a look in on our podcast, Deborah, hasn't it? Isn't it?
That's true. That's very true. But fortunately, today I've elbowed Dennis out of the way, so I've got the seat back. But I do hope he's enjoying his time off in the sunshine.
I'm sure he is. Before we get into our bulletin post, Deborah, it would probably be helpful for listeners to hear a little bit about what's going on with LLG or indeed ammo.
Well, absolutely. And it's sort of spring social time of the year, really. So there's a lot of conferences happening. It goes without saying, our spring conference was a massive success this year. It was a sellout, great content.
Hmm.
But obviously, one of the big highlights of the spring conference is always the awards. And this year, for the first time ever, we did an awards ceremony with no trophies
I know.
because the parcel delivery service didn't manage to deliver them in time. But you'll be pleased to know there's a massive box of trophies now sitting in my hall,
Hmm.
and they'll be delivered to the winners shortly. But we've got the LGR conference tomorrow, very exciting. And we have the MO conference in July, and that's a big one for ammo, and it's going to be bigger and better than ever this year. And with so much to talk about, we should have some really, really good content there.
Yeah.
We also have Work Experience Week, the first week in July, where we have students, typically final year students, generally law, but it could also be history, politics, etc. But people who have a real interest in getting into law in local government. And so we have a large number of those arriving first week in July. And that's always really heartwarming because every year people finish that week. Some of them will have job offers, some of them will have summer placements, some will be invited back to interview for apprenticeships or training contracts sort of later in the year. So that's really good to keep that succession planning going. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And then there's the LGA conference. That's another big meetup with all of the stakeholders across the sector, and that's in Bournemouth this year. And then we're still working really hard on Mazur, and there was actually a really strong session on the spring conference on that one, with respect to how in local government you make decisions to delegate legal work to other teams safely. And I think we're really hoping to get to the point where we've got some guidance that we'll be able to share on that. But a fantastic session with the SRA and Silex on that as well. So it's been very, very busy indeed.
It has. Busy, busy. I'm exhausted just listening to all of that. But let us return to the news from the bulletin. And first up, something close to my heart, as it happens, Deborah. Booze and the World Cup.
Indeed. So, unless you live on a cave or a desert island, or perhaps as a hermit, it will have come to your attention by now that the Men's Football World Cup got underway last week. And government has been quick to encourage licensing authorities to swiftly approve outdoor gatherings for the World Cup.
Yep, that's right. And the reason, of course, is that they want to support, the government says, community celebrations, and they are great, and boost trade for pubs and hospitality venues. Now, apologies to our Welsh members before I go on. I appreciate that this item may be a little painful, so perhaps turn your attention to our Welsh bulletin for some comfort.
Indeed, trigger alert for the Welsh there. Now, this is the news that ministers have urged councils across England to adopt a pragmatic approach to temporary event applications linked to the tournament, including requests for outdoor screenings and extended opening hours. Now, Community Secretary Steve Reed is expected to write to local leaders, urging them not to act as the fun police by obstructing sensible plans that would allow fans to watch matches together in beer gardens and other outdoor spaces.
Well, under separate measures announced by the government, pubs in England and Wales will be permitted to remain open until 2 a.m. if any of the home nations progress to the knockout stages of the Men's World Cup. And councils have also been asked to process temporary event notices swiftly to accommodate later opening hours and special events tied to the competition.
How exciting. Now, while local authorities will retain the final decision-making power over licensing applications, ministers have indicated that councils that unnecessarily block proposals could face scrutiny from central government. The government is also proposing changes aimed at reducing bureaucracy for hospitality businesses. Now, these include extending the current maximum 2-year period for pavement licenses, allowing pubs, bars, and restaurants greater flexibility to provide outdoor seating, pavement pints, and al fresco dining.
I like that phrase, pavement pints. I don't know why. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government said further details on reforms to pavement licensing, including the proposed maximum term and any legislative changes, will be announced in due course. And ministers are also expected to consult on introducing a minimum duration for such licenses. So, come on, England. And Scotland, of course, who've gone down a storm in America. If you've seen the coverage from Boston, brilliant. Now, in other news, the government have announced new laws to shut down this, I love this, dodgy high street shops in a crime crackdown. And actually, this is quite serious. So, but that is the government's actual use of the word dodgy. And it'd be interesting to see that definition in law. I don't suppose it will make it to the statute books, but interesting choice of word, Deborah.
Absolutely. That's a sort of word we like here. Speaking plain English, that's what I say. So, anyway, the government's announcement on the 10th of June signals a significant shift in enforcement strategy across organised crime operating through high street businesses. Now, the proposed legislative reforms are intended to equip local authorities, police, trading standards, etc., with enhanced powers to address so-called dodgy shops linked to criminal activity, including money laundering, illicit tobacco sales, and immigration offences.
Well, at the centre of the reforms is a proposal to extend the maximum duration of closure orders. Now, currently, premises can be closed for up to 6 months, but enforcement agencies have reported that businesses often reopen before investigations are complete, which allows criminal activity to resume.
Which obviously is not a good idea. Now, the
No.
government intends to double this maximum period through secondary legislation, providing investigators with additional time to gather evidence and pursue prosecutions.
So closure, ugh, I'll get my words out. Closure orders have long been a key enforcement tool. Actually, we're doing some training on this that should be available on the website around that issue, but particularly for trading standards teams, they've relied on it. However, the current limitations, particularly the need for repeated applications, has created procedural burdens and reduced their overall effectiveness.
Now, extending closure periods may reduce reliance on successive applications and enable a more sustained disruption of criminal operations. Now, the government also proposes the introduction of a new closure power that does not solely rely on evidence of antisocial behaviour. Now, this is a notable development.
Well, it is actually, because I would say that many closure applications are grounded in antisocial behaviour legislation, which often does not neatly align with the nature of organised economic crime. It's different.
Yeah, and a bespoke power targeting criminality in commercial premises could broaden the evidential base for intervention and improve the prospects of successful enforcement action.
Well, alongside legislative reform, the announcement does include a 30 million funding boost to support enforcement activity, with expectations of widespread inspections, arrests, and asset recovery.
And the establishment of a high street organised crime unit, that to me sounded like a bunch of 15-year-olds going in search of vapes. This further indicates a coordinated multi-agency approach. Now, for local authorities, this may result in increased collaboration with central government bodies and law enforcement, as well as heightened expectations around proactive enforcement.
Well, I hope it results in increased collaboration. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to work. But importantly, the reforms acknowledge the complexity of investigating organised crime, particularly where ownership structures and financial flows are, frankly, deliberately obscured for obvious reasons.
And the extended timeframes and enhanced powers are therefore intended not only to close premises, but to enable authorities to identify and prosecute those directing criminal activity behind the scenes.
Well, look, there's no doubt that these reforms do present an opportunity to adopt a more robust and sustained approach to tackling organised crime on the high street. But Deborah, I've heard harrowing stories, and they've been reported in the press from trading standard officers who've been threatened in their own homes. And I think the government's missed a trick here by not picking up on officer safety. It's incredibly important. But maybe there'll be something in the pipeline. Let's hope so.
Indeed, I mean that's particularly worrying. I think we've all seen those stories, and it does then impact on the ability of local authorities to recruit and retain staff if people have to work in that
Oh,
sort of environment.
absolutely. Um, Now, Deborah, let's move on because there's an interesting High Court case on the horizon, and this is really interesting for solicitors. It's around SRA privilege rights.
Well, absolutely. And as I understand it, all lawyers are brought up believing that by adding to emails and letters those wonderful words legally privileged, they can then protect that correspondence from being revealed to prying eyes. It's confidential, they might say, but not so. The Solicitors Regulation Authority has um, powers to legally require production of privileged material, possibly disclosing your advice to a client department, to senior officers, or to elected members. No, I hear you cry, but in what circumstances?
Well, the High Court is to hold a 3-day hearing over the regulator's right to obtain solicitor-client discussions to conduct its own investigations. Now, this is Carter Ruck Solicitors and a Mercy and the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and it's going to rule on a dispute between the libel firm and the SRA about the production of material concerning its client, who is businessman Mohammed Amersi.
Now, in this case, the regulator issued three production notices under Section 44B of the Solicitors Act 1974, requiring production of client files. Now, over the following 18 months, Carter Ruck and the SRA corresponded over the regulator's power to require production of material subject to legal professional privilege.
Well, the case will be heard from, I believe, the 20th to the 22nd of July. The claimants assert that legal professional privilege is a fundamental right and that the Solicitors Act does not expressly override it. And they submit that the Legal Services Act 2007 did not take the opportunity to give the SRA power to override privilege.
Now, the SRA asserts that its investigative powers allow it to require production of documents and that it was clearly the intention of Parliament to make this possible. The regulator and its predecessors have operated for decades on the basis that it has the power to compel the production of privileged material. And if you think about it in the light of the ethics debates that have been breaking out recently, that there's clearly in some cases going to be ethical reasons as well, I would imagine, why they'd want to see such documents.
Well, we will, of course, report further on the outcome of this intriguing case, which at its core is basically all about a fundamental legal principle and an important one. So let's move to a very topical item next. So this is the news that the first ever government guidance on healthy screen use for children aged 5 to 16 has been published. Now, I have to say, I actually think they should do some healthy screen guidance for OAPs as well, because my mother can't keep off it. She's constantly on it. She often, I think, lonely older people can get addicted to the dopamine hit just as much as the young, and indeed anybody else. But we've got our guidance now, Deborah, anyhow.
Well, that's a good start, isn't it? And this government guidance will represent a significant development in the regulation of children's digital environments. The proposed guidance, led jointly by the Department for Education and the Department of Health and Social Care, aims to provide practical, evidence-based support to parents navigating the complexities of children's screen use in modern society.
Well, at its core, the initial, I beg your pardon, the initiative recognizes that digital technology is now embedded in childhood experiences from education and social interaction to entertainment and well-being. And the government has deliberately avoided prescribing rigid limits. Instead, it's opted for a framework that enables families to make informed choices about issues such as smartphone ownership, social media use, and what it references as sleep hygiene. I imagine that's about not staying up all night looking at your phone.
It is, and I think it's also about turning your phone off before you go to bed so that the pings don't wake you up. But yeah, all of that sort of thing. It's about making sure that your sleep cycles aren't disturbed. Um, so that the guidance is currently subject to a call for evidence with stakeholders, including parents, schools, and professionals, invited to contribute to its development. And an independent expert group will oversee its formulation, ensuring that the final recommendations are grounded in robust research and reflect the realities of children's digital lives.
Well, I think significantly, the announcement does link the guidance to a broader programme of reform. So that's the continued implementation of the Online Safety Act, requirements around phone-free classrooms, and of course, proposals for safety certification of educational technologies. Now, together, these measures illustrate, I would say, an increasingly integrated regulatory framework governing children's interaction with digital services, which is needed across both home and school settings.
Now, authorities may need to consider how the guidance aligns with existing statutory duties in relation to child welfare, as well as its potential integration into local policies on education, early help, and digital inclusion. The announcement also highlights the government's intention to incorporate children's voices into policy development, notably through the establishment of an AI Youth Advisory Board.
I like the sound of that, Deborah. Let's hope they have the youth actively involved with that, i.e., there are young people on it, not just
As opposed to just AI. Yeah,
yeah. Um,
yeah.
Now, Dennis and I have touched on this before in the podcast, and I have to say I'm not entirely sure how I feel about them, but robo-taxis are set to make an appearance, Deborah.
Oh, great. Well, there you go. I find nothing more terrifying than the idea of cars driving around with no drivers. But yes, it's true. Robo taxis are coming to London streets soon. I already find it quite difficult to cross the road without being hit by buses, cyclists, and taxis with drivers. So this is going to be an added safeguarding issue for me, I'm sure. So this is the news that London streets are poised to enter a new era of transport, with self-driving taxis expected to begin carrying passengers possibly within weeks as Uber prepares to introduce autonomous rides through its partnership with British technology company Wave.
Well, the initial rollout will involve electric Ford Mustang Mach-E vehicles equipped with Wave's artificial intelligence driving system. Now, under current UK regulations, trained safety operators will remain behind the wheel. So they're not going to be driverless to start with during what it calls the early stages of trial deployment. But I think the more interesting question is, what are the rules that govern these vehicles?
Well, it's a good question, really, particularly as I have an Audi with inbuilt sort of safety controls. But my Audi would rather I actually hit a cyclist or a pedestrian than go across the white line in the middle of the road. That's absolutely its priority that you
Mm.
stay within lane. So it's all about priorities, and some of the calls that you make as a human are not necessarily based on doing the same thing every time. So how does a remote car respond to that, really? This announcement concerns a pilot scheme or trial program, but a new regulatory system is emerging, as detailed in a recent post from our corporate partner, Waitmans, and
Mm.
they highlight the essentials of the new scheme, which is yet to be put fully in place. Now, the legal foundation for driverless taxis was laid by the Automated Vehicles Act 2024. However, the Act alone does not authorise commercial taxi services.
So that's interesting. So there is no commercial autonomous taxi service which has yet been formally permitted to operate in London, and that final step now hinges on a single mechanism, and that's the Automated Passenger Services Permitting Scheme, or what's referred to as APS. Another an acronym, marvelous. Now, the APS is designed specifically to deal with taxi, private hire, and bus style services operating without a driver. So this isn't just about taxis. Um, the APS consultation closed in September of last year, with government confirming that the statutory instrument enabling the scheme would come into force in spring 2026. So we're expecting it, allowing permits to be issued thereafter.
Now, under the APS scheme, operators will require a permit to carry paying passengers in vehicles with no safety driver. Now, each deployment must be supported by a detailed safety case assessed by the National Vehicle Certification Agency, with permits being service specific rather than blanket approvals. Now, whilst the APS permit is granted at national level by the Department for Transport, the consent of the local licensing authority is required prior to permit approval.
Hmm. Well, Transport for London has recently confirmed that no autonomous vehicle currently operating in the UK meets the standards required to carry passengers as a licensed taxi or private hire vehicle in the capital. So none can legally carry fee-paying passengers. That's important. Just yet, what you will see soon are driverless vehicles only as part of these pilots or trials that have been approved for assessment.
But watch this space. We will let you know when the APS permitting schemes comes into proper effect. Credit to Waitmans for their article used in this item. Thank you very much.
Well, I was going to ask you, Deborah, whether you'd use it, but I think what you said at the start of that section very verbally puts it in the no category.
Well, for me, it's an absolutely no. Firstly, because of yeah, safety concerns, etc. But secondly, because I actually quite enjoy a taxi ride, and part of that is not just being ferried from A to B; it's the conversations with the driver and hearing what's going on in the area, and them pointing out interesting things along the way, or telling them who's been in the cab. And in some cases, I've had some really constructive conversations with drivers. I had one once take me to be interviewed by the BBC outside of Parliament, and he was so helpful in just getting me to breathe and relax and sort of get things in place. And I think getting from A to B is only part of the service that you get in a London taxi, and I want that little bit extra.
Fair enough. I don't think I'll be getting in one either. And now for our final item of this edition, it's gone quickly. We've had a lot of interest from our membership on this, and providing guidance is something they've asked us to do. But this is the government's update following the Supreme Court judgment on the 2nd of June this year, clarifying the definition of deprivation of liberty.
Indeed. Now, the Department of Health and Social Care has issued updated guidance following the Supreme Court judgment of the 2nd of June 2026, clarifying the definition of deprivation of liberty. The revised position applies with immediate effect across the UK and requires prompt attention from local authorities and their legal advisors. So
Yeah,
pick this up now.
it really does, yeah. So the clarified definition directly affects the application of safeguards for individuals who lack capacity to consent to their care and residence. As such, it has immediate relevance for the operation of the deprivation of liberty safeguards regime and related decision-making frameworks within adult social care.
Now, for local authority lawyers, the principal challenge lies in implementation, reviewing whether existing authorisations, care arrangements, and assessments remain compliant under the clarified definition. This includes identifying cases where deprivation of liberty may now arise in circumstances that were previously considered outside
Mm.
scope. And the need for reassessment may generate increased demand for authorisations and place additional pressure on already constrained resources.
No, that's right. So the guidance is directed at a wide professional audience. So that's important because it's had to be written in that way. So that includes health and social care practitioners, carers, and those responsible for organisational policy and procedure. Now, this reinforces the expectations that local authorities will undertake a systematic review of internal documentation, operational guidance, and training provision to ensure alignment with the updated legal position. But it's not going to be the kind of guidance that's going to help specifically legal practitioners really understand the sort of impact of the case, if that makes sense.
Now, from a governance perspective, there is a clear need to ensure that frontline practice reflects the clarified definition in a consistent and legally robust manner. This may require coordinated action across legal, commissioning, and operational teams, particularly where complex care arrangements are in place.
So what the judgment does do is it reinforces the importance of careful legal analysis in deprivation of liberty cases. And I think that's where our membership are going to need or have asked for some help. So practitioners will need to apply the clarified definition to a range of factual scenarios, often involving nuanced assessments of control, supervision, and restriction, alongside considerations of capacity and best interest. So this is not easy. And legal teams will definitely play a central role in supporting implementation, ensuring that decisions, processes, and advice reflects the clarified definition while maintaining compliance with statutory obligations and safeguarding responsibilities. And as I said, LLG we are talking to corporate partners about how we might support the sector with this change. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 23, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me too, and thank you for listening.